In connecting with the Buddha's humanity, we connect with our own. So reflecting on the Buddha's birth, we reflect on our own birth. Reflecting on his awakening, therefore touches our own capacity for awakening. And reflecting on his death and parinibbana, we don't forget our own death, the fact of our mortality. So Vesak Day encapsulates all of that. So you could say one way of looking at it, that it's from birth to death, everything in between. And it's utterly essential in everything that I'm going to say today that we stay in touch with our humanity, with our sense of sitting here, like as you hear these words, know that I'm speaking as a human being, that I have, skin and sensitivity to touch, and that you have skin and sensitivity to touch. And the Buddha had skin and sensitivity to touch. And that we feel, you might say, in our bodies. Perhaps you could check right now the quality of your awareness of the body, the feeling of sitting here, of being embodied. And let that be a grounding quality. Let it help you land so that my words are human words that touch your heart, right? Not conceptually concept is powerful, and we'll be making use of it just as we are right now. All of these words are concepts that aim your mind. Even if I'm aiming you to the body, I'm doing it with words. But let's just stay as much as we can in this sense of our flesh and our humanity, because otherwise I don't think it's possible to understand what the Buddha was teaching, honestly. Throughout the discourses, as you read, you get a sense of not only the Buddha as human being walking around to all these places and teaching, but if you're sensitive to it, you get a sense of the humanity of all the people who were around him, who came to him for teachings. You get a sense of his friendships. You get a sense of the friendships among the people that were around him. You get a sense of life in the village and life in the towns. And sometimes if we just focus on the Buddha's teachings on meditation, we miss that. And somehow then we go to meditate and we develop, let's say, some mindfulness, maybe some, calming, some samadhi, concentration. And we wonder, why does my path not feel, why does it feel somehow separated out from my life? How can we form, how can we feel, how can we live a whole life path if we don't have a sense of the living quality of the path that was actually offered and how it was taught, when it was actually taught? So let's contemplate together what it might have actually been like to be born and awaken and teach, and what would it have been like to actually receive those teachings, and what does that say about how we live now 2,500 years later, right? What's it actually say to this very life, this life that we're living with Zoom, with sitting here now, with whatever's outside your windows? So, to begin with, this birth was an actual, the same way that all humans and animals, or mammals anyway, are born. You come down a birth canal and you come out and you're all slimy, just, like all of us. We were slimy when we were born. The Buddha was slimy when he was born. He must have been, right? And that's not in the discourses. And all of, all the touches of the world are activated, all the sensitivities of the skin, the hot and the cold, and all the noises and all the light. Just as sensitive as you were, as I was in the moment of birth. And this is not distant. Just as sensitive as you were and I was at the moment of birth, and just as sensitive as you are and I am right now. You're hearing these words, just like a baby hears sounds, only now your brain has developed and you have language, and you have the touch of the sound, and it's so sensitive. This little membrane in your head is moving along with my throat so that my mind can connect to your mind by the use of language, but it's a mental mind-to-mind connection through the flesh of the ear, sensitive, so sensitive. And you hear my voice, you hear my humanity in my voice, right? You hear all the little details that maybe you're not analyzing consciously, but your mind is definitely analyzing who I am. That's how you survive in a social world. Who is this person? Is this safe? What are they like? What are they trying to say? How do they feel? So your sensitivity is analyzing, right? So you have the physical sensitivity of the touch of the sound and all of the profound interpersonal, relational sensitivity of hearing who I am. And we're awakening into this moment together because of it. So when this being, Gautama, was born, human being, he was born with those sensitivities. He too learned language, and he too played with toys, different toys than we had. There were no plastic, but he played with toys, and he ate oatmeal and, rice meal, whatever exactly the grain was that was boiled, just like we did. And as this human being, Gautama, lived his life, without a doubt, this was a sensitive, astute, intelligent child. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. You might know some. You might have been such a, strange child that perceived things that, maybe other children don't perceive. I'll grant that there was something absolutely extraordinary already from the genetics and whatever structure, and perhaps, and we cannot eliminate this, what was conditioned through lifetimes. However you want to think about it, genetic conditioning is through lifetimes. If you want to think of it materially, or that there's something beyond that our science tells us, we can just let that sit in front of us like a problem. We can let it bother us. But the fact is, here's this person now a regular person coming up through the world and making sense of the world and seeing all the stuff of normal humanity, seeing the folly, seeing the pain, seeing, disease and death and lust and fear, seeing greed, seeing a village trying to work together to survive in a changing world. India was moving from, the kind of it was moving in towards a more consolidated kingdoms, right? So it was a lot of political change happening that had real on the ground effects as these kings fought for territory and took over territory. And the Buddhas, the Sakyan, the Sakyas from this town were kind of pawns in that game. The Buddha was not a king, by the way. That's a myth. His father was not a king. His father was like probably a tribal elder kind of guy, but still respected, had within that small, tiny little world, had some respect and power. But the kings, they could crush. And this was the reality, just like we have the realities of immigration, and there were ethnic realities, and there were slaves. There was some terrible stuff back then. Very human, very painful. And this is what the Buddha saw. Well, he wasn't the Buddha yet. This is what Gautama saw. So in saying, wait a minute, the myth is, of course, that he rode out from a palace. There were no palaces, but he rode out from his protected situation, which is, of course, valid. He rode out from that and saw like icons of aging, illness, and death, and a renunciate, a sadhu, wouldn't have been necessarily a monk, but someone wearing saffron robes who had given things up. So that's the kind of the condensed way of talking about his development towards seeing. You mean there's something besides this incredible, sometimes quite ugly struggle, painful struggle of humanity? And imagine how intensely he had to feel that, to leave his privileged and comfortable position. Now, understand, there was no social security. There was no, there were no social programs that were going to catch him. When he left into a world that by our standards was profoundly impoverished, and life was not easy. Nothing was guaranteed. And so he left a place where things were not guaranteed, but quite secure. So let's pause for a moment and ask ourselves, what is the nature of such a movement of his heart, of his mind? And for you, do I really see the suffering around me? This is a profound question. Do I see the suffering of this life I'm living where, kind of the grabbing of the world and trying to make it work the way, I can find workable. And perhaps I don't know all of you for sure, but perhaps you have some degree of the privilege I have where you know that you have a shelter, you have enough food. And That's not a given in this world. We're seeing more and more. There's a lot of pain in this world. Do we recognize it? Do we let it touch us? So where's it going? Is it going anywhere besides just, you live for a while and it's kind of rough. Sometimes you have some really great experiences, then it's rough again, then you have some great experiences, then you die. That's kind of where it goes, right? So remember that death is always there, even though we're talking about fairly early in the Buddha's life, that death is always there, like it is for us. And the Buddha knew that for sure. He saw mortality. There's no question about that. So there's another perspective that I want to sustain throughout the rest of this story, which is sensing into the Buddha's, you might say, commitment and zeal. Can you sense that every conscious moment the Buddha was on his path, every conscious moment? So when we talk about a whole life path, we have a model. We have a model in the Buddha. We have a model in perhaps some of our spiritual friends, some of our teachers. Maybe we see them living a path. But on Vesak Day, we're thinking about, the birth, awakening, and final act of the Buddha's life. So we see in this a path that is always on. Always the inquiry was alive. Always the sense of being in contact with both human suffering and human capacity. Like something in the Buddha's heart or mind knew something is greater than this is possible. That's why he left home and went on this search. He felt, this. I don't think this search is going to fail. This is going to work. I'm going to make it work. It was more like that, That's a whole life path. There is no moment, no aspect of his mind, of his thinking, no action, no speech, no meal, no sensation that is left out of that path, right? That's how it is for us. Whether we know it or not, every moment is path. How could it not be? Because every moment conditions the next, right? I'll pause and let's actually sense into that. So right now, this very moment, as you sit here, do you feel the body-mind conditioned, for example, by the words that I'm saying? It inclines your thoughts a certain way. Perhaps the body experience is a certain quality right now. These pauses condition the moment. Is there any moment that could be left out? Where would it go? If there was a moment that wasn't part of your path, what's it part? Where did it go? What happened? Did it just disappear? Was it a slice that you took and put on a shelf? You see what I'm saying? It just doesn't make sense. So here we are, whole life path together right now, reflecting on the Buddha's moment by moment, whole life path. So he goes off on this search and he's doing exactly what you and I have done. He goes to spiritual friends. He goes to teachers. He doesn't know exactly how to do this. He was just a particularly smart, sensitive person, in a village, without these teachings, where's he going to start? So he hears about, teacher, and he goes to this teacher. And, the story is, I find it very believable that, he learns what this teacher has to teach up to certain meditative attainments and says, nice stuff, still suffering. Have you ever felt that? You go to retreat or you go to meditate, you practice some mindfulness and you're done. You say, whoops, still suffering. It's the same thing for him. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll keep going. I guess I'll look for the next step on this path. So you have this sense of this whole life path, only now it's got this meditative element as well. So he goes to another highly regarded teacher and once again meditates with diligence. And because his life has been very refined and pure with his morality and so on, his mind is settled enough. Doesn't have a lot of remorse or anger, or, he doesn't have the demons in his mind of greed and lust just grasping at him all the time. So he begins to settle and the meditative qualities emerge, and his whole life path touches other aspects of human possibility of great refinement of awareness and samadhi. And in that refinement, he begins to see more. And he says, oh yeah, okay, I've gone further. And he masters that. But he has the same experience. Whoops, still suffering. The mind is still grabbing at things. It still believes its own story. I have not broken through. And this happens yet again as he moves through, into this particular aspect of the whole life path of formal meditation practice. So imagine the diligence, imagine the intensity, because this is now we're talking about taking up ascetic practices where he doesn't eat and, just lives with a utter lack of not only sensory indulgence, but there's a kind of a punishing of the body that was part of the belief system that he had bought into. But he keeps coming back to this, nope, still suffering. Until he had to see through the dominant paradigm. He had to see through what everyone around him was saying is the nature of the path, which is all this self-torture and self-denial. Imagine all of the pressure. All of his friends believed this stuff and judged him when he went to actually finally say, wait a minute, this isn't working, and he eats some food. And the body can manage itself without all that pain and lack of nutrition. It's, we're talking a pretty intense whole life path here, but the dominant paradigm was not working. Maybe we're stuck in a paradigm that's not working. Are you? Are there things that you believe about the path because all your friends or people like me tell you how it is, and maybe it's wrong? Maybe something in you needs that creative spark to see what the nature of the path really is. I don't know. It's worth thinking about. So now he sits under a tree. He's had some food. And you know what he finds? Pleasure. a quality of pleasure, the absorption of the mind, the freedom from the harshness and grasping. When it settles, the natural piti, rapture, comes up. And this rapture washes through every cell of the body. Perhaps some of you have experienced it in extremes. All of you, this is important, have experienced it at least some. You just in moments when the flood of agitation and ignorance and push settles and clears out, even for a moment, the natural bliss of awareness can be directly experienced, right? Now that can get more continuous and more, let's say, stronger. But we know this. Each of us knows this. Sometime perhaps just sitting by a stream or sitting by the seashore or just finding a place where the body-mind was at ease in a relational experience, an experience of comfort and safety, and something lets go, and you begin to touch a quality of body-mind that's just inherently beautiful. Well, this is what the Buddha followed. And the mind got more settled, more bright, until this moment that we celebrate on Vesak Day of seeing through, seeing the whole fabricating process, the construction of the world, and the dropping of it. And no longer being fooled by the magic tricks of consciousness. And inherent in this was all of the support that he had to do that from his teachers, his spiritual friends, his colleagues. Even when he had to turn away, he had been delivered to this place by a whole society, a whole subculture of spiritual seekers. This was not a lone journey. This was part of a whole movement, the Shramana movement, the movement of renunciates that were wandering around us in northern India was a thing, just like you're part of a thing now, this resurgence of Dhamma. And that's what makes this whole life path possible, is that we have all of this, we're all together in it. Imagine if the whole world were literally a war zone. Places that are war zones, it's very difficult to find, the space, the safety, the teachings, the conditions, or any other number of ways we could describe situations where you would not have the support, or where the Buddha didn't have the support, but he did. And he had teachers, just like you have teachers. So now he sees things and makes this radical decision where he could have just comfortably sat there and lived out his life very peacefully. He decides to teach. So now we want to sense into that, because this is a whole life path of teaching, of sharing Dhamma. What's the feeling behind that? What was in his heart? Why would he do that? He must have thought that it would be useful. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it, right? What would it be useful for? Relieving suffering. Why would he want to relieve suffering? Because he saw suffering and he felt that. He knew it. His humanity knew the humanity of everyone, right? His insight was insight into the fundamental nature of suffering, not his personal suffering. He just had his own particular story. His father, his mother had died. He had very difficult relationship with his father who wanted him to go into the family business, very common story. And he saw with his own flesh, he saw lust. How do you think that he could give, this is a good question, how could he give teachings on greed, hatred, and delusion without knowing them? You know what I'm saying? He had to know them. How could he have given teachings on ignorance without having been ignorant? How could he have been given teachings on eroding, dissolving of the self, and recognizing that it's a gradual process and a difficult process if it hadn't been such a process for him? Yeah. He believed in the self, just like you and I sometimes do, right? And he moved beyond that. So he could teach it because he knew it. He didn't invent this stuff. He talked frequently about, how demons, Mara, would come to visit him. Does Mara ever visit you? I think so. Visits me. The voice of delusion in the mind. So this whole life path of this human being speaks to our whole life path. And now he's teaching it, and we have this lineage that we're part of. This is a lineage right here. So in teaching kind of how we can also move beyond ignorance, teaching how we can invite the softening, the dissolution, the erosion of the self. The Buddha developed lots and lots of very intelligent, clever, useful teaching systems, like the Four Noble Truths, like the Noble Eightfold Path, and so on. They were all systems, so they're all fabricated, but they're brilliant. And what they speak to is saying, this quality of freedom that I have experienced, you can experience. That there is this human capacity that we all have. And we do spend a lot of our time tangled up. So we can't expect that this is going to be necessarily quick and easy, because think of all the conditioning that each of us has from our families, from our culture. We have a culture that tells us you will be happy if you own more things, buy more things, have all sorts of physical comforts. And the business of, let's say, Amazon has done very well with with us trying to satisfy our sensory pleasures. And we live in a culture that says, build up the self, feel good about yourself, make the self, somehow stabilize it in the world, build up your all your friendships and so on to reflect and stabilize this self, and you'll be happy and secure. And that has made a fortune for Facebook. Right? So we have all the external structures in the world, like Amazon representing lust and Facebook representing the self-making. And by the way, let's keep ourselves in a trance so we don't see this because it's too painful. So let's fill our minds up with all kinds of stuff. And now we got Google and we got Netflix and, we've got all of those things that say, make a fortune off us trying to, stay ignorant so we don't touch the guts of our situation. So the external structures reflect the internal processes. And then we have subgroups in our society that are set up against each other by skin color, by gender, by age. And that, works in this space of kind of external hatred and internal hatred, judgments of ourselves, judgments of others. And also, the competition for resources, which is, for physical comfort and survival. So all of those forces that are at work through our biology are manifested also in our relationships and in our culture, and we keep it going. So now we're talking about this whole life path that the Buddha lays out for us. And we're saying, wait a minute, are you saying that this is going to slice through this whole universe that I've created of my, I've got 3,227 friends now. I'm doing well. Did you see how many views I had on that last thing I posted? And how many likes? I'm doing really well right now. Well, maybe it's not so well. Maybe I'm not doing so well. I don't know. And we have these conversations with ourselves. But a whole life path is like, we don't leave out the internet. We don't leave out the issues of racial justice. We don't leave out how our consuming to bring comfort to this body mind is not only never going to bring stability, but it keeps us in the wanting, in the kind of the tension of wanting. Do I really have to give that up or what? What is this about? What is the nature of this path? No, you don't. What you have to do is look. You just look. The giving up happens because you realize what you thought was pleasurable is painful. It's not an outside moral judgment. You have to live this way. You have to give this up. It's just a look over here. Ehipassiko, come and see. And you'll see that this path that most of us are on, the typical movement of our culture and of our individual longings, is actually a path of continued pain. So it's not someone out there telling us, not the Buddha's life or something like, oh, I have to be like that or something. And if I'm not okay. No, these are pointers to waking up. And when we wake up, which is the power of mindfulness, the power of the calming mind lets us see deeper. That's where special, extraordinary practices like meditation come in and let us see deeper. So we let go more deeply. Right? And when we see, that's where the letting go happens. So the Buddha does this teaching, and you know what he does? He spends 45 years walking around northern India, people coming to him and day and night, for guidance. Teaches kings and he teaches peasants and he teaches whoever comes to him. And he develops over that period of time an ordained Sangha. It's a remarkable feat. if you ever participated in a community of any kind, you know how hard it is. When people come together, it's complicated. That's just how it is. That's formula. Does anybody not have complications in their family? I'm looking for someone to raise a hand. Not one. Has anybody ever participated in any group process at work or social justice thing or spiritual community that has not have complications and problems? Anyone? No problems at all for one person. I want to meet you. Oh no. Okay, you're saying, yeah, you're just validating what I'm saying. Thank you. Because if you actually had that, I want to meet you. I want you to be my teacher. You know what I'm saying? So that's how it is. So I'll tell you a story. I was for a short while ordained, and I went with my friend Venerable Sukhachito to a forest monastery, and it was this monastery was the head teachers were I think two brothers, or maybe they were cousins. I don't know. Anyway, they were quite well known in Sri Lanka, and this forest monastery was known for like real, intense meditation form. And they had a separate mountain within the already isolated monastery where these young monks would, go up the mountain. And in that special place up the mountain, they would do what needs to be done. They do this intense work. And they're described, this is being described to me by this head teacher who was kind enough to give us an audience. And so I asked, so is the idea that after they've done that that's their full awakening and then they're finished? And he said, oh, no. Then they have to come down and live with us. And that's where we do the rest of the work. And this was the place in Sri Lanka, like probably the most famous forest monastery known for the, intense, austere Vipassana practice and jhana practice. And still, it was absolutely known that you come down and then in the rub of humanity, you do the work. Now, what does that mean? How does that fit the teachings? So I'm going to offer you a way of understanding that shows you, that I hope shows you the value of the whole life path that you're living as lay people. And, because the Buddha spoke about a fourfold Sangha: lay men, lay women, ordained men, ordained women. Now, obviously, this was a gender binary era, so we have to just accept that. But the point is that the work of the lay people has a certain quality and certain values to it that are directly parallel, not to the refined life up on the hill, but to life in the monastery where humans are working with humans, right? So in the depth of meditation, this kind of penetrative quality of the mind becomes calm enough and settled enough and spacious enough to see things as they are. There's a seeing through where, as I said, the entirety of the delusion, the constructing process of the mind and the ways that we move in blindness is moved through. But at the same time, the whole of the path that the Buddha described is a path also of what he called effacement, or the diminishing, the eroding, the wearing away of the self. Okay? Now I'm going to ask you, does your experience perhaps parallel mine, that being a parent helped wear away yourself? or taking care of anyone who's been ill or dying, that wears away yourself, or that confronting a world that is in pain and trying to do something good about that, does that begin to take away self-centeredness and move you to care about others? What about your close, caring relationships? Have those shown you something beyond yourself as the center of the world? I would even suggest that caring for your dogs and cats and tending your garden contributes to wearing away the self, if there's just the droplet of wisdom, just enough so that the garden doesn't become all about me and my great garden. You know what I'm saying? That there's a losing oneself, or the kids, the children, become just an extension of your own ego, which is pretty easy to have happen. But it also happens that when this young person, when this tender person in the world needs something and you have to give it, it doesn't matter what you want right then. You got to give it, right? Does that sound like self-effacement? Do you want to teach your child truthfulness and transparency, honesty, goodness? So you see what I'm saying? That when we understand a whole life path as having this ignorance aspect, diminishing the ignorance, the intoxicant, the asava of ignorance, and the asava of self, and the effacement process that goes through all of our lives. And this is like what you see the Buddha teaching through those 45 years. And then when he dies, the point there is like, do your work now. This is it. Not a god. Buddha had a human body, the body died. You're not a god, I'm not a god. You're gonna die, I'm gonna die. You don't know when. And you take that lesson of death and you say, there's the zeal. I don't want to cause harm. I don't want to waste this life. I am so grateful for my spiritual friends. I'm so grateful for community. I could not do this alone. So that monastic community, the monastic sangha that was developed over the Buddha's 45 years, this brilliant creation that he helped bring about. Like we said, that's really quite something, not easy to do. That's the lineage. That's what's carried the teachings. All of my teachers were monastics. Direct lineage to these words I'm speaking. And now to you, and who are you going to share with? So, we're framed by birth and death. We feel our capacity for awakening. We have a path that's laid out. This noble eightfold path is quite brilliant, really. 8 kind of simple things that if you understand them a certain way, can provide some pretty good guidance. Right view. This is a practice of right view right now, coming to wise understanding. You and I, this is practice. Spiritual friends are essential. This is the Buddha's words. The voice of another and wise attention are the necessary conditions for the arising of right view. That's this. It's exactly what this is. And that's how it was with the Buddhist teachers. And ultimately, the voice of another, when you, let's say, read the discourses or when you practice Dharma contemplation as you did, that's the voice of another through the discourses, through language, through printed words. Fine. It's got us, come on. The Buddha died. It's okay. He left some words. They've been moved, handed down, changed, maybe distorted, added to, but still there's something essential in there. And your paying attention to those words becomes like a foundation for the arising of understanding in your heart. Wow, how did that happen? That's pretty amazing, I think. That's a practice of right view. And what does it do? It aims the mind in a wholesome direction. And that aiming of the mind is right intention, which we're also practicing. And we have right attention, the practice of right intention happening all around us in our vows, our commitments, our artwork, our statues. Say, remember this, remember this. There are practices of compassion when we look at, like a picture of Jesus on the cross is a practice of intention. It's to aim the mind towards compassion, towards faith, and so on. And it's like very powerful imagery to go to the heart, to move the heart. Right speech. Do we feel like every word we speak is path? Now, it might be path towards delusion, but it could be the right path. It could be wise speech, kind speech. But, we can be kind in our speech and truthful and beneficial, even wise, and not recognize it, not notice how good is this path being alive in us. We overlook what's good. We're very good at judging ourselves. But do you see all the honesty that you care about in your life? All the kindness, the compassion, and right action. The action for the benefit of self and other and both is the highest and the best. And this is something that we can see in our lives and that we can grow in our lives. And that's our path is like, okay, let's let it grow. And right livelihood. How many of you are in the business of making poisons and weapons? Oh, well, good. None of you. So that's a good start. How many of you are in the business of slaves and, kind of butchering? No? Good start. So where do you go from here? How do you move resources through your life? How do you get the resources? How do you spend the resources? Oh, that's your path. And right effort, psychological freedom, diminishing the unwholesome, cultivating the wholesome. It's a whole life path. Every minute conditions the next. How's the energy and the effort now? Now, like right now, as I'm talking, not abstract, You're paying attention. If you're paying attention, that's the energy, that's right effort towards the wholesome. And right mindfulness and right samadhi. Nothing left out. Nothing left out. So thank you, friends. We're going to have time for some questions and reflection together. And before we do that, we'll take some time for the body. So I propose before we do that, we take 1 minute together in silence to just let this sit and sense as you're sitting in silence now, perhaps you can sense the whole life path moving through you. This is path, this moment is path, and how beautiful that is. Let's take 3 minutes now to attend to the body as needed, and I'll see you very shortly. I'll look forward to it.